Welcome back to the Homeschool Dad's podcast. This is another camp edition. This will be a little bit shorter. We are here in West Virginia, beautiful mountains and lake behind us. And I've got a special guest, Calvin Sears. He's a dad of 3. He's been homeschooling for about 10 years. And he almost chokes on coffee because he's got this weird epiglottis thing. Let's get into it. All right, Calvin, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I appreciate it. Our audience here are other dads who have chosen to homeschool. Some of the dads are hyper engaged in the education. Some of them basically just support their wives, and their wives are doing the bulk of the education. But the dads have taken the responsibility of educating their kids on their shoulders. And as you know, as a homeschool dad, you know there's a bunch of flavors of homeschool. There's like the Montessori style, there's the like classical style, there's the do everything on a computer style. There's like all kinds of flavors.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about your flavor. Like, how has your family chosen to homeschool? What's the vibe of your approach?
So I think it is a little bit different depending on what state you're in, right? Because different states have different requirements, offer different things. We live in Pennsylvania, and I know my wife, when we talked about it, we decided we wanted to homeschool. She wanted to make sure that we tried to follow the state type curriculum. And so we tried to find curriculums that followed along what the state also recommended as well. So, but we also wanted something that was Christian based, that would kind of put into the curriculum some things that we could kind of focus our kids on with God. So we actually chose sunlight, and we've tried different things on and off. We've the monastery, like you mentioned that too. We've tried different things. Sunlight was really good, particularly because we want to just have a curriculum, like I said, that we can involve God through. And this particular curriculum does. It has scattered all throughout different points on scripture-based reading that the kids can do. And so it makes it a little easier on the parents because, of course, we do our own Bible studies. We're trying to get our kids involved daily in understanding God's way of life. But this is particularly good because they're looking at science, math, history, etc. And then along the way, you're able to kind of sprinkle those things in. So that's kind of the approach we took. And then we also, take that at the end of the year and we have an assessment done. And so the person that does that assessment kind of signs off, so to speak. So hopefully even though we're doing homeschool, by the end of it, and I know this is kind of dependent on the state, but we should be able to graduate with a high school degree.
Right.
So we'll see how that goes as time moves on.
I think, like you said, each state has their own thing, but the state standards, as long as you can kind of attach the stuff you're doing to the state standards, you're saying, hey, and then like you said, you have an evaluator. We also use an evaluator in Florida. And that evaluator says, okay, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, have you made progress? Meaningful, I think it's meaningful progress is the legal term, which is pretty ambiguous, frankly. But my wife and I are in the driver's seat. And you guys are in the driver's seat. You're choosing what to do and what not to do. And I've heard of sunlight. I think we even use sunlight for a little bit because similarly, we've jumped around a bunch of different curriculums trying to find the thing that fits best for us. We've been homeschooling for 20-something years at this point. And it's like sunlight was great. I remember using it. So awesome. Okay. So, I think this is going to be kind of fruitful conversation. Almost everybody that I've interviewed up to this point, something comes into the conversation, whether it's alluded to or it's just outright stated, the idea of socialization. So like when a family, when a husband or a wife, maybe the wife says, I want to homeschool. And the husband's like, what? You want to be weirdos? Or, like sometimes it's that way.
Right.
But the decision is made as a family. We're going to go and homeschool. Right. Other family members who don't support it or friends who kind of push back, almost always the first argument is, but what about socialization? Right. I would love to hear your thoughts on socialization as a philosophy. What's right and wrong about that? Is there any credence to these people who are pushing back? How do you feel about that with you and your family?
So, my wife and I talked about this, and as every other topic, we are not 100% eye to eye. but we come to an agreement because we have the same basic belief system, and we understand what's good, and we have the right aim, right? So we have an aim for our kids, and I think that's the most important thing, because if you're talking about socialization, you have to ask yourself, well, what is my aim, right? Because there is, in my opinion, there is good and there's bad socialization.
Okay.
So just the ability to socialize is not necessarily a good thing. There are types of ways that I don't want my kid to be able to socialize with my children. I don't want them to know certain lingo. I don't want them to I don't want them to be perceptive of certain ways that children, may negatively treat each other in the school systems, and so forth. But I think the more important thing is not just avoiding those negatives, but also, like you mentioned earlier with the curriculum, if you are the parent, you are sort of in control and have that ability to guide and direct, which I think is crucial, because if you don't have your children at home with you, then you really are kind of giving them into the hands of wherever that's going to take them and the people that are in charge of that sort of thing. So, and again, I think, we can't take our kids out of the world. They have to learn to be able to adapt and to be able to stand up for their beliefs, especially. But I do think there's a certain age time frame there where the parents really need to be and should be the center and the core of that direction, and really the child understanding, proper socialization from a more mature perspective.
Okay.
To where we're not just, maybe going back and forth with our own peers, so to speak.
So one of the arguments that I hear the most and I see the most in terms of like childhood psychologists, they're going to say, well, it's all about reps, right? So it's the thinking is, if you're homeschooling and it's an only child, you have 3 kids, so they have siblings they have to deal with, right? Interact with intersocially, interpersonally. A kid who goes to a class and they have hundreds or even thousands of interactions with kids every year, the child psychologist would say that's what's preparing them for the real world, right? Conflict resolution. A kid cheats in a game. How do they handle that? A kid steals something from them. How do they handle that? A kid treats them nicer than they were expecting. How do they handle that? Like, the argument would be, we need public schools where you have 500 kids who are all the same age in these classes, so they can get the reps of all these what they'd call micro interpersonal moments,
micro lessons, you might say.
Yeah, exactly. And they compound, and that's what gives us emotional intelligence. When you hear that, how would you respond to that kind of argument for, well, you don't have your kids in public school, so they're missing out on this wealth of interpersonal, reps?
Psychologists are concerned with social effectiveness. So, for example, you've heard the term street smarts.
Sure.
That's because a person who has grown up in the streets has developed street smarts. So they're socially effective on the streets, so to speak. That's what they're looking at, and they look at that, and I think it's important too to be humble, and not say that there's no truth in something, right? Because it is true. It is true that repetition is good, and it is true that the same repetition of being able to be in uncomfortable situations is important, because that really helps establish, okay, here's my what my character is going to be,
right?
Towards other people. But if they're never given the guidance to build that foundation of that character in the first place, from their parents or from the people that want to give them that direction truly and set that tone for them, then that's where it becomes difficult. That's why I say there is a pocket of time, I think, where it's really important for kids to specifically be with their parents and their siblings. And then I think in time, yes, and it doesn't have to be through school, it doesn't have to be through the public school, in time, though, it is important, right, that they get that exposure, and they're going to have to learn to stand up for those things. So it's a little long-winded here answering to what you said, but
No, I think that's great. Like
yeah.
you made the point that that like you have to choose a direction. And what I hear when you say that is, if you send your kids to school, you're not getting to choose the direction. The teacher, who is getting paid probably not enough, who doesn't love your kid as much as you do.
Right.
You and your wife love your kid infinitely more than these paid people. I'm sure there are great teachers. Please don't misunderstand me. But they don't love your kid the way you love your kid. Right. But this idea of these micro moments, they stack up. I think that's absolutely true. And you made the point, like, there's some truth to that for sure.
Right.
But if you're going a direction, you can craft moments for your kids to experience things and get them founded so that when they are punched in the face with an idea they weren't expecting, they're not totally rocked. Their ship isn't rocked.
Right. Right.
Something else that when I talk to my wife about this sort of thing, she makes the point that yeah, you have those stacked up moments, but it may not be teaching socialism. It may not be like this emotional intelligence. It could be just teaching kids to conform. Mm-hmm. If you're giving them a million opportunities to figure out what's everyone else doing in this situation, all of a sudden you're acting like everyone else.
Right.
And do we, as dads, homeschool dads, who have again taken this responsibility on our shoulders are broad, we can handle it. We've taken the responsibility for the good and the bad. If our kids are doing great, we get to say that's because of what we did. If they're doing terrible, we have to say that's because of what we did.
Right.
But are we letting our kids conform to the average kid, or do we want them to conform to what our family's values?
Well, you made a good point. We have to take ownership of that. And that's actually very important in a family, is that everybody is accountable to each
Mm-hmm.
other. The school doesn't offer that. And especially being accountable to those most close to you is learning how to love. We love our family, but sometimes our family can be the most difficult because we're around each other all the time. We're kind of, in each other's business, of course. We're all living under the same roof.
Yeah.
So, but that basic accountability to each other, and you mentioned, loving your children in the ways that the teachers don't. Mm-hmm. Well, people hear that and they, that may say, well, that's a given. But don't dismiss that so quickly, because the degree of concern that you're going to put into anything that you do is going to be correlated with how much you care.
Yep.
So, and we see this all the time, all over the place in the world. I mean, if you go to the doctor, a good doctor from a doctor who
just phoning it in.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not that they're not educated, because we're talking about education here. Mm-hmm. It's that sometimes doctors don't care as much. Mm-hmm. They don't have that good bedside manner.
Right.
You're not going to get as good of care. Right. And so that's kind of getting back to the point. There's education, but that education only goes so far if there's not the dynamic of love in there. And you're not going to get that, right, outside of your home in any way, shape, or form the way you would.
I mean, you might get love.
Right. Sure.
But it's like night and day, the
right,
love that you're willing to show to your kids because of your kids.
Right.
And your wife loves your kids, and especially if she's the one who's doing the bulk of the work. So I think that's a great point. So, that big idea of well, they have to have all these opportunities to learn emotional intelligence. I always think it's funny, because as if they can't learn that in your home or spending time with their family. That's kind of a crazy point. But I see that the research supports it, because they have public school that they can take research from. So right, of course that's what the numbers show. One of the other big pushbacks is diversity. With public school, a early childhood psychologist would say, oh, well, you need your kids to go to a public school so they can be exposed to diversity. All kinds of diversity of, and as adults, and I think that we can all agree, and I think this goes back to the idea that there's truth in all these things we're saying, but it gets inflated to say, oh, therefore you shouldn't homeschool, which I think that's foolish.
Sure.
But the diversity is, you have to work with people who disagree with you politically. You still have to, at work, you still have to work with them. You right, have to figure out how to get past that. People who have different religious beliefs. You have people who, have come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. People who come from different cultural backgrounds. This level of diversity, this is a real thing we have to deal with in the world. in our lives as adults.
Sure.
Like, we cannot live in a bubble. And that would be the argument that would say, well, if you homeschool your kid, you're just going to put them in this manufactured bubble that doesn't expose them to diversity. Do you have any strong opinions about that statement?
Well, I think it's interesting that all these claims are made directly involving the public school system, and why not any other institution, right? Which I'm sure they would say the same thing, that those truths may spill into other institutions, but there's almost seems to be a narrative that is pushed, you might say. But diversity, so this kind of gets back to, again, how do we want our kids to be able to socialize? Because if I can teach my children, like for instance, diversity, and I don't know what necessarily is meant by that. Are we meaning
like all
male,
all
female?
those things? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like people with different socioeconomic backgrounds, people from different cultural backgrounds, different political views, different
Right.
They would say that you're making this insulated bubble that they don't.
Sure.
How are they going to handle it when they meet somebody who's different than them?
I can speak for myself, and I would say, well, at home, if I'm teaching my kids correctly, diversity should not be an issue, because we're teaching them things like respect, irregardless of X, Y, and Z.
Sure.
We're teaching them things like care for your neighbor, love, all of these things that if we are teaching them correctly, and again, this gets back to the ownership that you were talking about earlier, the accountability that we have, then we are teaching them to be able to go into these places, recognize people, and treat them fairly. Because we have those conversations. These are, maybe that's what I meant when I was trying to talk about this earlier with focusing in on the public schooling system when these conversations are had, because it's almost like the assumption is being made that those conversations are not being had in the home.
Because
like,
the parents are bigots, we have to fix it by doing it. And
yeah. So there's major assumptions that go on there, and that may be true actually, because parenting's kind of fallen to the ground in a lot of ways in our society. So maybe that's why that assumption's there. Don't want to demonize someone for, or society at large for having those sorts of reasonings. They make sense, but again, and not knowing where your audience is coming from, for us, we're having those conversations. So I hear the concerns that people have, but I think the concerns are because we live.
Yeah, they do.
They're trying to
hijack the conversation.
Beat the mic. But yeah, with that, before I lose my train of thought, that's part of the homeschooling benefit, I guess is what I'm saying. And the idea that a random person or teacher would be able to do that better than a parent who loves their child and wants to direct them. Yeah. Again, with the assumption that that's where they're coming from. Sure. I think, you have that benefit.
Yeah. And I think specifically responding to the idea of like a bubble, there's probably a lot of the dads who have chosen to homeschool. Like, people choose to homeschool for a million different reasons. Sometimes it's religious freedom. Like they only want to, put into their kids' heads the religious views that they have. Cool. I get it. Sometimes it's political. They want to avoid like woke stuff, or they want their kid to only have woke stuff, and they don't want to have like a conservative school district not teaching woke stuff or whatever.
Right.
Again, when we take ownership, we say, this is why we're homeschooling, because we have values. Correct. And we value those values. So I think almost any dad who heard the concept of, how can you put them in a bubble and protect them from diversity? I think almost every dad would be like, yeah, that's the point. Like, put them in a bubble to a certain point. And that's kind of what you were talking about, like age appropriate. At some point, you're going to release them or expose them to things. And that comes back to socialization. Right. Like, it's like the idea of socialization is just because a kid isn't in public school, they never interact with another human outside the family. That's crazy talk. Right. Like, I take my kids to the bank, they talk to the bank tellers, like they see real world stuff all the time. And they can talk.
As in all of human history. Right. Your kid, you can't, unless you're someone who's going to, keep your children locked up in a house with just you and them, which I would not agree with something like that.
Sure.
But we're just talking about homeschooling here. So to your point, yes, and we do that. We get our kids out, we get them involved in activities, sports, all sorts of things where they're interacting with the kids their age. And we even have our daughter has a little friend that she's made, and we make sure we monitor their conversations and things like that. And it's not trying to avoid anything bad. We're just trying to guide them to be able to handle what's bad.
Right.
I say bad, that's a very general term, things that would maybe not fall into those values like you mentioned.
Yeah.
So again, if you're a parent, I think, and you want to take accountability, and this is where I wanted to be careful, because I don't want it to be like, what about, there's so many people that aren't afforded the privileges and the blessings to be in a position where they can homeschool their kids. I don't think that those parents are any less than the parents who do.
Right.
I just think they have a different challenge.
Sure.
And so our choice to homeschool was to try and alleviate a lot of those challenges, not to necessarily say, okay, well, if you are faced with those challenges, that makes someone any less of a parent. It's just, you have to be aware of these things, I think, in the same way, and then be willing to kind of take them on whenever they, present themselves.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of families, and we talk about the fact that we homeschool, and then a lot of times there's the person who doesn't. They almost get defensive immediately, and I'm like, no, I'm not saying this is what you need to do. It's just what we've chosen to do.
Right.
But there is almost like an immediate defensiveness. As they're like, oh well, I could never do that, or I can't. Like, oh, we couldn't afford to do that, or there's a million reasons.
Right.
A single mom, like, I get it. That's tough. There's a million reasons why people don't, and it's not a silver bullet. I don't think choosing to take your kids and educate them at home does not make them the best kid in the world. It doesn't make you a better family. That's crazy talk.
Right.
So yeah, I'm glad you made that point.
Yeah. And I think you and I would both agree with this. We're trying to be helpful, right? And I think it's just good to have conversations like what we're doing right here, because there's a general narrative that gets pushed, and that's just kind of the mainstream.
Yeah.
And so those little micro conversations are good.
Yeah. I think someone who would be scared to homeschool because of the idea of socialization, they say, well, we don't have a group we can join. Like, how's my kid gonna be normal, or whatever that means, whatever normal means. The fear of socialization being the argument not to homeschool. I would say, if someone wants to homeschool, if a dad particularly is saying, I think the best thing for our family is for us to homeschool. Are we going to take a hit because we're going to lose the income? Yeah, we might, but is that a sacrifice we're willing to take?
Right.
Does this align with our values? Do we value that time with our kids that we cannot get back? Like, I've got a 21-year-old, 19-year-old, 13-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 5-year-old. So I have one kid out of the house married. I got a kid who's getting married in November. It is very real to me how quickly this goes. Like, I only have them for so long. And you kids are a little younger, and my advice to you and every dad watching this, don't squander it. Like, it's precious. We can't lose it.
It's very, very, your time with your kids is so short. And you made a good point. I mean, there's nothing without sacrifice. Like, you're going to sacrifice one thing or the other. If you sent your kids to public school, you would sacrifice certain things. If you homeschool them, you're going to be sacrificing certain things. To your point, I mean, it's not like there's a golden road where everything's perfect.
Right.
And you made that point. I mean, you have to sit down and talk about what those, what those struggles are going to be, what's going to be difficult, and how you're going to handle that. And then, based upon your decision, I think it's a good thing to remember that it's going to affect everything else. So if you decide to homeschool, that would then affect, decisions based off of work,
There's trickle down
correct
ramifications for every decision, for sure.
Correct. Yeah. So, that was a good point though. And
so let's transition a little bit, because we're talking about some of the sacrifice. Is there, and I try to ask everybody, and we'll kind of wrap this up because this is the short camp version. What is something that you do to try to support your wife in her effort to carry the burden of educating your kids at home? What's something you do to support your wife that some of the guys listening to this could be like, oh, that's a good idea. I should do that more.
Right.
Even if there's something that you should do and you don't do very well. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is another maybe question that is going to be very relative to each person's situation. Some of the dads might have to go to work. They're not home, so it may be very difficult to kind of help or support their wives if their wives are at home teaching the kids. My particular job, I go into the office. I may be in for a week at a time. I may be home. I might go in for a couple of days, but I do get to stay home. And so I try to help my wife as much as I can. I'm still working, but I have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and she's currently teaching the 10 and the 8-year-old. And my 3-year-old can be a handful, right?
All 3-year-olds can be.
Yep. But this gets back to, the dynamic in the household, being accountable and working together, I think. And so this helps the kids help her also. But a lot of times, if she needs me to, I can take our 3-year-old and she'll, come into the room with me and I'll continue working on my computer and just to kind of help her so she can focus on the kids. Because we were just talking about that. There's always a challenge. You can't avoid challenges in life. Nothing will be perfect. But there's things you can do to work around those. Definitely too, being empathetic with your wife, just understanding that what she's doing is a full-time job. It's absolutely a full-time job. Not only that, but it's a difficult job. It's a stressful job and it's a job that carries a lot of, maybe I'll say the word burden, because that you have taken that role and you say, I'm responsible for my children's education.
Yeah, that's heavy.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
So your wife can carry that at times and, maybe even feel down on herself at times. So be very encouraging and things like that, empathetic, just understand that she's doing something very, very important for your family.
That cannot, I wish I could say that in triplicate. There's so many times you see a homeschool family who's like struggling and the mom is like pulling her hair out. She's like, this is so hard. And the dad, because he's working, he's not there. In his mind, he's like, oh, we're doing great. Everything's going great.
Right.
And he doesn't know his wife's falling apart, know?
Right.
There's communication that has to be there to find, in order to be empathetic, you have to be talking. Like, what are you struggling with, babe? Like, what's going on? Like, where can I help you? And without those conversations, without that honest dialogue, you can be blindly unaware of how hard, like the burden she's carrying or that weight is too much. And as husbands, sometimes we just need to take that weight off her shoulders for a little while. Just give her a break.
Right.
Now, exactly how we do that, that's the question. Like, how do we do that? How do we help them, But I think empathy is great.
And that's what's great about it. Homeschooling is very malleable. So you can have your schedule for what. So now that we're on this, I'll say this too. If your kids are getting to a point where it's too much information, they're getting stressed, it's difficult. If you're homeschooling, that's fine. We take a break.
Yeah.
We go take a walk, get some outdoor time in, do whatever you need to do, those sorts of things. And that's where you can really help your wife too, is just being supportive of that and just understanding, hey, we don't have a time frame. Let's just make sure we're effective.
Yeah. Oh, that is so good. Effective.
Yeah.
That's something I think we sometimes will overlook because if we're judging how our kid's doing compared to the kid down the street or the family who has it all put together, in reality, they're falling apart. You know what I mean? Like they look like they have it put together.
And we are too sometimes. But
100%. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So
I think if we're judging ourselves or we're measuring ourselves based on this family or that family, it doesn't take into consideration all those elements that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think being empathetic is super important. Taking that weight off is super important. Letting your wife know, hey, like, who are we trying to impress?
It's a challenge that gives you the opportunity to do things within a family that you couldn't do if your family is kind of spread apart and your kids are elsewhere and so forth.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about homeschooling is you redeem so much time. And that is it's almost impossible to quantify, even though you can try. It's so valuable. Okay, last question, and we'll wrap this thing up.
All right.
I try to ask every dad.
I have to clarify the epiglottis too.
Oh yeah, so tell us about that. What's the deal
Oh,
with that?
it's nothing. If my wife ever watches this, she'll be laughing because I don't know what it is. I don't know if I didn't develop correctly, but it's very consistent. I would say once a week. If I drink anything, water, coffee, it just doesn't go down right, and I end up choking.
Oh man,
It's the problem. We've been in church before, walked in late, trying to be quiet, and I sit down and drink a cup of coffee, and I choke it up, and
everybody's like, "What's
everyone's
this
looking
dude?"
back. Yeah, so anyway, that was the quirky thing.
Epiglottis is such a fun word to say. Epiglottis.
Yeah.
It's just a bizarre, and that is just a little hangy down thing in the back of your throat, right?
It's actually it's the muscle spasm that kind of moves, to open up your airway.
Okay.
So if that's like not completely closed all the way, you'll go to swallow and it'll kind of go down the wrong.
That's the
pipe
worst. Okay, let's talk. Last question. I try to ask everybody about a vivid memory that you have with your dad as a child. What's something that just stands out, like you're there when you think about it? Do you have one of those memories with your dad?
Yeah. So my dad was like huge sports guy. Love football, and he would always go out in the backyard with me, throw the football, and I loved it. I lived for it. Of course, he was just this sort of like adrenaline junkie kind of guy. So he was always liking to push the limits, and he'd get way back at the back of our property and just launch the ball way up in the air and just see if I could catch it. And he was just doing stuff like that. But yeah, it was just great memories. And
yeah.
So
something I hope that, I've noticed this as I've asked guys this. Sometimes they'll say something pretty poignant, and it's like, man, I hope I'm taking the time to do that thing. I hope if that's what matters to my boys, throwing a football in the backyard and just totally launching it, if that's what they're gonna like lock in and remember as if it was yesterday, am I like pushing that down because it's not important compared to the important stuff? I feel like so many times the answers I get are not like, we took a trip to Paris. Like, that's awesome. Yeah. But like, that's not the stuff that sticks in kids' minds. Right. Like it's these little things, or the consistent thing where you're like, my dad was 100% locked in. Like we were together.
Right.
And I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
So hopefully we're all doing that. We're saying yes to those moments where we can lock in to our kids, because I think that's the thing that's going to stick with them. Okay. So in this episode, we've covered a bunch of stuff. We talked about mostly socialization and kind of the errors or the assumptions that are baked into that as an argument against homeschool. We talked a lot about it. I loved that. That was fantastic. We talked about some of the ways that we can be supporting our wives through being empathetic to recognizing the fact that it is a full-time job. And a lot of times, especially if your wife is a stay-at-home mom, she's got the education, but she's also like responsible for cleaning the house and making the food and driving kids places and all the other stuff. And as dads, recognizing that is like 7 full-time jobs.
Right. I'll comment on that.
Okay.
I think another way to help your wife, be willing to have more of a shared responsibility over those things that you were just mentioning. It may fall in line sometimes where she's doing all of those things, but that's an important point to just kind of recognize that and be willing to kind of jump in and take the ownership of helping her or whatever she needs.
Yeah. I think a lot of the guys who watch this podcast are probably living in like normal like gender role marriages, right? Where their wife is probably staying home and not working and doing the education. They are probably the ones going out or working from home or whatever, but they're the ones who are earning money. And that sometimes like at marriage, rarely are we having a conversation about like, here's your job description as wife. Do all of my laundry. You know what I mean? Like I think if we enumerated it at marriage, I think our wives would be like, wait, what? But I think sometimes we fall into the rhythms of what, a stereotypical gender role marriage is. And we don't, as husbands, we don't enumerate all that stuff that kind of ends up being on it. And then there's also the I think my wife talks about this, the psychological burden of being the one who worries about things like a doctor's appointment, or have the kids seen the dentist this year, or whatever.
Right.
Like all these things, and it's just like kind of constantly playing in the back of their minds. And a lot of times for me, and maybe this is not the case for most dads, but that stuff is just not taking up any cognitive load for me. But for her, it is. So add that on top of all this other stuff, like making our home a place I like to be.
Yeah.
And she's great at doing that, and I love her for it. But if I take it for granted, all of a sudden you have all this weight on her, and I'm just like fat and happy. I'm like, oh man, things are so great. And she's just drowning.
Right.
So the empathy, I think, is critical.
And, again, my values that I would be speaking to in that regard would be, if you look at Jesus Christ, he has a role. He has a position. He's our Lord and Master. But then he came and he died for us. So the point being is that if there's a need, right, he saw the need that he was willing to come and do something even as difficult as what he went through. And we have to kind of have that same mentality, right?
If are we willing to step in and do the need? Yeah.
Right. And that was not something that was his to bear, but he did it, and he did it for us. And so likewise with our wives, right? She may have a certain role, she may have certain responsibilities, but if you see the need, just be willing to jump in there. And even if it's, it's going to put a burden or something like that on you, be willing to take the burden.
Take the burden.
Bear the burden. So
Great point. So this has been good. We've covered a bunch of stuff. I'm so glad that you were willing to take the time to sit down and talk with me. I hope that the things we talked about has been encouraging to you all. So thank you so much, Calvin.
Yep, thank
Appreciate
you.
it, man.
All right.
Hey, homeschool dads, I hope you and your families learned something awesome today.